Hi, welcome to the assembly video of the Two Trees Sapphire Plus or XY 3D printer. Take note that this assembly video only applies to the Sapphire Plus model sold by 3D Gadgets Malaysia. Before we begin, do cross-check these components for assembly with what you see on screen. Pay special attention to the labels on these bags. Without further ado, let's begin. For this section, stand by 220/40 extrusion while making sure of the orientation as seen in this video. Once you are sure of the correct orientation, lay them down sideways. Also stand by a 20/20 extrusion, make sure the screw holes facing the camera are wider and that the position of the holes are nearer to your right hand, while making sure the flat part is facing the bottom. You then insert the 20/20 extrusion into the wider slot of the 20/40 extrusion. If done correctly, everything should lay flush on the table. Now position the base as seen in this video and slide in both 20/40 extrusion into the base. Once the extrusion are fully inserted into the base, secure them from the bottom with the included M5 10mm screw. You will find all screws in a bag labeled A2. Make sure that all screws are completely tightened. Now let's flip the assembly 90 degrees to make the next step easier. Prepare the other set of 20/40 extrusion and 20/20 extrusion and insert them into the base just as before. Make sure the orientation of the extrusions are as seen in this video. Just as before, secure the fully inserted extrusion to the base with the included M5 10mm screw. Once the extrusion are secured to the base, tighten all four corners with the included M5 16mm screw. For this next section, stand by the two Z-axis linear rails while making sure of the correct orientation as seen in this video. Insert the Z-axis linear rail into the base and secure the top of the linear rail with the included M5 30mm screw. Make sure the screws are completely tightened. Repeat the same process on the other side. With the top of the linear rail secure, also tighten the bottom of the linear rail to the base using the included M5 10mm screw. For this next section, stand the printer up and prepare for the corner bracket installation. You will find the needed component in the bag label B1. Prepare the corner bracket with the washer, the screw and the T-nut. Make sure this is how they look like. Prepare 4 sets of them. Install the corner bracket at the bottom corner of the 20/20 extrusion. Take the time to make sure that the T-nut is locking properly into the channel of the extrusion. Repeat the process for all 4 corners of the extrusion and make sure that the screws are tightened securely. For this section, we will need both the heat bed support platform, both the Z-axis lead screw, and the M3 6mm screws. They are in a bag label B3. Secure the heat bed platform to the linear rail using the included M3 6mm screw. Repeat the same process for the other Z-axis linear rail. Insert the Z-axis lead screw through the heat bed platform into the coupler. Make sure that the lead screw is seated properly in the coupler before tightening the 2 set screws. Repeat the same process for the other lead screw. For this next section, prepare the build surface sticker, the heat bed, and the heat bed insulator. Remove the protective film from the heat bed. You then remove the protective backing from the insulator before sticking it at the bottom of the heat bed, making sure that it is centered. Prepare these bed leveling components, which can be found in the bag labeled B7. Firstly, place the heat bed on top of the heat bed platform while making sure that the holes are aligned. Next, insert the screw from the top through the heat bed into the platform. Do the same for all four corners. With all four screws inserted, it is time to insert the bed spring into the screw in between the heat bed and the heat bed platform. Do the same for all corners, taking your time to make sure that the bed springs are inserted correctly. Once you are done with the bed springs, insert the leveling knobs in all four corners of the bed. Tighten the leveling knob about 10 turns. Do the same for all corners. Lastly, peel the protective backing from underneath the build surface sticker. Place the sticker on top of the heat bed while applying even pressure and making sure that everything is centered and aligned with no air gap in between. For this next step, we need the lead screw bracket as seen in this video. Install the bracket at the top of the lead screw. Also make sure that the top of the bracket is parallel to the top of the 2020 extrusion. Make sure that the T-nuts are locking correctly in the extrusion channel when tightening. Repeat the same process for the other side of the lead screw. Install the limit switch bracket on both sides of the extrusion, connect the wires, and make sure they sit flush to the base. Also take this opportunity to loosen all four screws on the brass coupler. You only need to loosen them a few turns. Do this for both sides. Before we move on to the next step, be sure to remove all four stopper plugs on the linear rails. Let's use the included grease to lube up the two lead screws. Be sure to use a generous amount and lube up the whole length of the two rods. For this section, we place the top gantry on top of the base, while making sure that the stepper motors are facing the front of the printer. Tighten the top gantry with the included M5 10mm screws. Do the same for all four corners. Make sure all screws are tightened completely. With the top section now tightened, we now tighten the side of the gantry with the included M5 16mm screw. Do the same for all four corners. Make sure the screws are completely in. For the hot end assembly, remove the three screws that are already secured to the bracket. Place the hot end at the bracket while making sure the cables go over the gantry and not under it. You then secure the hot end to the bracket using the three screws that were removed earlier. Next, install the X limit switch exactly as seen in this video. Take special note of the orientation of the trigger. With the switch installed, push the hot end all the way to the end to make sure that the switch is actually hitting the end stop. These are the components needed for this section. You'll find them all in a bag labeled Gadgets. Insert the connector into the sensor. Make sure of the correct orientation of the wires. You then secure the sensor to the mount with the provided screws. Make sure it looks exactly like this once assembled. For this section, we will be assembling the extruder. You will find all the components in the bag labeled C2. Start by installing the spring and the spacer on the thumb screw. Tighten it a few turns on the extruder. Install the short PTFE tube at the bottom of the extruder. Install the two T-nut screw as seen in this video. Now mount the extruder on the 2040 extrusion. Be careful not to over tighten the T-nut screw as the bracket is only made from plastic. Insert the long PTFE tube into the top part of the extruder. For this section, we will install the filament runout sensor. All the components can be found in a bag labeled D3. Use the shorter screws with the T-nut. Install them exactly as this video. Mount the filament runout sensor on a holder with a longer screw. They thread in directly to the mount. No T-nuts are needed. Be careful not to over-tighten the longer screws, as it might crush the plastic casing of the sensor. Install the whole assembly on the 2040 extrusion about 3 cm away from the extruder. Install the included cable into the filament sensor. Insert the other end of the long PTFE tube into the hot end. Make sure it's pushed in all the way until you cannot see the black marking on the tube anymore. Filament might leak if the tube is not pushed in all the way. For this section, we will be installing the spool holder. All the components needed can be found in the bag label C4. Mount the spool holder 15 cm away from the base of the printer. Double check with a spool of filament to make sure that there's enough clearance. Connect the cable labeled E to the extruder. Connect the cable labeled X to the X-axis stepper motor. Connect the cable labeled Y to the Y-axis stepper motor. Position the Y-axis limit switch connector behind the GT2 belt before installing the Y-axis limit switch cable. Install the cable to the heat bed. Make sure that the connector is locked in properly. Now it is time to tidy up the wiring. Tuck in the wires into the channel of the extrusion. Install the extrusion cover for the Y-axis limit switch cable. Use the extrusion cover to push the connector up so that it doesn't contact the GT2 cable. Do the same for both Z-axis wiring. Tuck in excess wire into the base. Tidy up the rest of the wiring by tucking them into the extrusion channel. Secure the hot end wiring to the hot end bracket via the provided slot with cable tie. Do the same for the wiring into the base. Make sure there's enough slack for the hot end to move the whole print area. Plug in the power cable and turn on the printer. You have now successfully assembled a Two Trees Sapphire Plus Core XY 3D printer. We will now go through the process of leveling the bed for the Sapphire Plus. Firstly, press 2, followed by More, and Z carriage sync. This will ensure that both sides of the Z carriage will be aligned. Once that step is done, press Manual Level. Select the first leveling point. Once the nozzle moves to the correct position, slide the paper underneath the nozzle. If there's too much drag on the paper, turn the leveling knob right to lower the bed. If the paper is too loose, turn the leveling knob left to raise the bed. The key here is to adjust all 4 corners until there's only a slight drag on the paper. You might have to repeat this process a few times until you get all 4 corners relatively the same. Once all 4 corners are manually level, press the auto level button and let the sensor read 25 points of the bed. With auto level done, now it's time to do the final Z offset. We can adjust the Z offset with the increment of 0.01 mm to 0.1 mm. Just like with the manual level before this, the goal is to adjust the nozzle until there's only a slight drag on the A4 paper. Z- brings the nozzle closer to the bed, while Z+ brings the nozzle further away from the bed. Lastly, access Auto Tune PID. This sequence will take a few minutes to complete. Once it is done, the printer will restart itself. And that's all there is to it to setting up your 3D printer. Happy printing!